It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the Avenue of Eternal Peace,
Well, all right. Welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast, Kevin and Chuck. Well, today we're going to talk about hurricanes. Um, as you know, Hurricane Helene has kind of tore through a good bit of the country and causing a little chaos. Um, Also, as you know, those of you who've been listening for a little bit, you know that I was at prepper camp, and prepper camp was right in the middle of Western North Carolina in Saluda. And turns out I got to see quite a bit firsthand. So I kind of, we're going to talk about a lot of things you can do to prepare and plan ahead for a hurricane. But I also want to talk about some of my adventure through there because a lot of things came up firsthand that really brought to light, where people's preparedness kind of fell short, where people, came through extra and, people helping out people. That's a really a big part of, what it all comes down to. So we're definitely going to talk about good supplies and good things like that. But I'm going to kind of take you through my adventure because you're going to see a lot of the things and the mistakes and the decision making, which I got to say is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Was everyone at prepper camp prepared is what you're probably wondering. And I got to say it's about 50-50, but I was among those who were possibly
You're
unprepared.
among the 50 of one of them.
Yeah, I was in one of the groups. We're going to get into it and talk about which one and how that went. So it could be a little sketchy, but that was the thing. Everybody was like, "Well, it's a true test of, actually putting your preparedness to the test." Now,
Mhm.
it was crazy. I mean, that's the whole thing. So here's what we got. So prepper camp was supposed to start. We were supposed to go set up everything on Thursday, and the hurricane was just kind of rolling into North Carolina there on Thursday, and then kind of into Friday, and that's really when they got the bulk of the rain and all that stuff. Um, and so they postponed on Thursday, and they said, you know what? It's supposed to all stop raining by Friday at 1 o'clock. Show up then, and we'll set up, and then we'll do it all a day later and see what we can do. Well, obviously, nobody, they were saying on the news, they were saying, oh, it's going to be a record storm and storm of the century is damage and like that. They were talking like some big stuff, but it was only at the last minute, like the
Right.
day before. The day before,
Mm-hmm.
they were like, oh, this is really going to change and be bad. And nobody was thinking, crazy. You're like, oh, hurricane, whatever. I'll deal with it. I'm not in the hurricane, so it'll be okay, right?
Right.
That's the logic. And we're preppers, right? So we're going to be prepared. So what was weird is we start driving and head out. We got all our gear and I have tons of water, lots of food, lots of that. That's no problem. Camping gear, stuff for electric, everything. We're good. We're prepped. Now you notice I didn't say extra gas, but we'll get to that. Right. So we're like, all right, no problem. We'll jump into this. Now, one, I'm looking at the stupid gas gauge on my truck that says miles to destination, or what is it, end of destination or something. It has a little thing and it
Right.
tells you how many miles you can go on your gas tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, turns out that was a crock, and that had nothing to do with reality of
Mm-hmm.
how many miles you could go. So, basically when I go to leave the journey, it says I can get there and I can get about halfway back just on my tank of gas. We start going and going into it. We get about, I would say, 160 miles from our destination. And my gas gauge shows 250 miles to end a tank. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we're good. I can get back here. We're not
Right.
We're not worried about it. And I am always like the most paranoid guy in the world on not running out of gas. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But we also didn't realize there was going to be crazy devastation like there was as far as power outage and like that. Start going in. Like I said, we got to about 150 miles out, and there is power everywhere up to this line. And no problem. Everything looks normal. There is nothing. Then, and I'm looking and I'm like, all right, I got enough to get where I'm going and back to where I am. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm good. And I'm thinking I'm going to get gas shortly.
Right.
And that's not, whatever. I'm not planning on pushing all that, but I'm like, I'm good. So I start going. From that point on, the whole highway, it was 40 and 85 going in. The whole highway is trees down. And if you think of like Kevin up the north, you got the New York State Thruway. Here we have 95 is the big corridor that goes down through the south. This is a road like that where you have 50 feet almost to the tree line and, of grass on either side and nothing. And this thing has trees all in the middle of the road. And you're like, how this doesn't even make sense,
Mm-hmm.
And the whole way we're going, there's just trees down. There's power lines down across the highway. We came up to a car carrier that had power lines in between the cars in the car carrier and then down across on our side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're following power guys in their truck coming in and they stop and we're like, oh, cool. They're going to handle that power line situation. So they go out and they clear the power line out of the road on our side and they just leave it in the guy's truck and on the other side just take off. And I'm like, oh, that's not really that cool.
Yeah.
But we keep going and it's just tree after tree in the road. There's no power the entire way in the rest of the way. And like, I should have got pictures, but it was just, you're so focused on, all right, this is what we got to do. I don't care about pictures right now. This isn't the time for it. We're just driving and intense and we're trying to figure out. And so there's just no power the whole way. It got so crazy where there's so many power lines and and trees in the road that I would say in a mile of travel, we drove over or under probably 10 to 15 power lines in a mile. And it would be like that for like 15 miles. And it wouldn't be like, and so you're thinking, well, how are they going to recover power? Because every yard you look in, there's down power lines, like every single yard. You're like, there's no way, I've never seen it. You see one broken power line and you're like, oh, they got to come out and fix that. Yeah.
Right.
This is like every single one. And we would come up, it would be the trees would be like mudslide into the road where the entire lane is blocked by 3 foot high of earth with 2 giant trees on it. And you're like, oh, that's weird, and then you drive out to the other side and half the road is like gone. And you're like, oh, that's a little sketchy. I got to get around that. So it was, just all the way in was like high stress and whatever. We show up, they're like, oh, we don't know if we're going to cancel. Oh, and so as I roll in though, I'm watching my fuel gauge thing cutting down. It goes from like 70 miles to 50 miles. And then like 40. I mean, and I don't mean like over time I'm watching that. I mean, I'm watching it. And in the 5 seconds, it goes 70 to 50. And then it's like 40 to 20. And then they're like, you have 7 miles to the, and I'm like, what the hell is happening here? And, so I'm the prepping guy and I'm totally dropping the ball on my own situation. So bottom line, we go in, we go past gas stations that are clearly closed with the power out. And we're like, all right, no problem. And it had been, like I said, at least 150 miles since we saw a gas station that was working. And so we kept moving in And we get to where we're going, and I'm like, well, somebody will help me out there. And if not, I got enough food and water for like 10 days. It's not really a big problem, and whatever, we'll figure it out. And I'm like, by then they'll get power on in town. And because you're just not thinking it's going to be the end of the world where power never comes back on.
Right.
That's the mindset, right? But I'm still dumb, and I still dropped the ball on that one. And, I think my wife would like me to point out that she suggested we get gas before.
I am sure she wants you to point that out.
Yeah, you feel like that definitely had to make it.
Uh-huh.
So so we go in, we got, I think it says like on the truck, like 22 miles to the end of your fuel kind of thing. And town is about 6 miles away. But the trick is it's a million back roads from where we are to the gas station. And you don't know which ones are closed. You're like, oh, well, I'll just look on my map and on my phone and it'll tell me. Well, one, the map on your phone doesn't work at all because there's no cell towers at all. And you're like, oh, well, it has like the memory and it says like off whatever. Well, one, it's not showing you what roads are closed. And we're not talking about roads are closed like there's a tree in the way. Because you're like, oh, well, I carry a chainsaw. Nothing's going to stop me. No, we're talking like the road's closed because there's no road. Like it's gone. Like there's a big hole. Or there's 10 feet of mud on the road and there's no road. It's like that. It's not like if I have my chainsaw, I can just get through it. No, it's not like that at all. This is like
bulldozer work.
Bulldozer work. And, you could hike through it. Maybe it wouldn't be safe, but you could do it. But you're not driving through and you're like, well, I have 4-wheel drive. No. It's not a 4-wheel drive kind of situation, dude. Most of these, it's not a 4-wheeler situation.
Right.
Like you could drive a mile out of the way through the trees and probably get by with a 4-wheeler, but you're not going through here in kind of situation. So it really changes the perspective on the level of preparedness you need with something like that. And that's what was going on here. And it was crazy. So we were constantly the whole way in getting like the flash flood warnings and that kind of thing on the phone. I mean, it's just nonstop buzzing on your phone. I can't watch the map because it's popping up every second. You're in immediate danger, flash flooding, you're going to die. And I'm on like a throughway. What do you want me to do? I'm going like, there's nothing here for you. I don't know what to do. So we just kept pushing in and it was crazy. And we're going on. We get there. We get set up. I start talking to people, prepper camp. Everybody's cool and awesome. And there were a decent amount of people there. The guy who ran the ham radio class, this guy Ty's like, hey, I got this cool tent set up. I got a generator. I got Starlink. Everything's good. We can, hang out. And Ty was awesome, and we hung out, and that worked out. Then we met some other people, Amanda and Jeremiah there, and whatever that you saw in the email. They some other good people who were there and took care of us, and we're like, hey, we're gonna help you get to town and figure out some gas, whatever. It ended up the ham radio guys like, I got a diesel truck and I got 5 gallons of gas left over from my generator for the weekend. So I'm happy to share and, whatever, and take care of you. And that got me back the 5 miles, the 5 gallons of gas. And that's the other thing we'll talk about is fuel mileage in your vehicle. 5 gallons got me to a gas station where I could wait 2.5 hours in line. I think it was more like 3 hours, but I didn't like set a timer. I just know I kept looking, going, are they going to run out of gas? Are they going to run out of gas? Right. Is it, and you're panicked. You're in a line that's just forever. Like you can't even see the pumps from where you are. And, and you're watching, like, if people don't speed up to the next bumper, somebody's cutting in. and cutting and snaking the line. And you're like, no, what are you doing? You know, it's like that. I'll kill you. You know, people are ready to shoot each other and whatever. It was high stress. So there's all that. So they hooked me up. But that was the big thing, right? I'm looking at the truck and it's like, oh, you get like 13 miles to the gallon. And I'm like, man, if we had taken the minivan, then I'd be getting like 26 miles to the gallon. And those gallons go a lot further and I'd have a lot less stress. So that's something to think about when you choose your vehicle. Now, would it have had the height and the clearance that I needed for some of the areas we came through? Probably not. And actually, believe it or not, the little like 2 inches higher on the minivan versus the height of my truck would probably have not allowed us to go under some of the trees that we got in. I know a lot of the guys with trailers weren't able to get out. And that was a big thing. Like, they're like, we can't take our trailer through here because we're too tall, you know? And it's like I said, it was mostly power lines that were down. We didn't see, like I said, I saw a lot of mudslides into the road, but we didn't have the tragic flooding that places like, you know, you saw in the pictures in Asheville and like that had. Anywhere we went, there wasn't really the flooding, but you saw tons and tons of trees that were just saturated and falling over. So anyway, one of the big things that came up, let's kind of get into the prepping stuff. So it just ended up, I mean, I had a great time, a good weekend with it. And it was just high stress because the whole time you're like worried, like, am I going to get home? How am I going to get home? Am I going to be camping for 10 days? Am I going to, you know, I mean, these are all the things that just go through your mind and stress you out. But it all worked out. And I was like, you know, I'm surrounded by good people and people who are out here having a good time and, you know, whatever. And you do that. Plus, I was trying not to announce to the world that I'm the most unprepared prepping badass that's out there. You know, I'm just saying.
Right.
But you know how that is. But the other thing, we just had a good time. But as far as prepping, what I wish I'd had. Well, first, let's go through some things that were awesome and kicked ass. One, I had my wife there and she was there to give me the motivation, we'll say, to keep things moving and going the right way.
She was, and it's always important to have your wife around for these sorts of situations to tell you what you should have done.
Yes, that is always helpful. I will say, a long time ago for my chicken coops, I bought this light bulb that has like a little solar charger pack with it. And it was like $10. And I was like, oh, I can put the solar on the roof of the chicken coop and extend the winter days, the laying, whatever. I had this with me. This thing was awesome because they actually, where we were, they had shower houses that had water, just not hot water and no lights inside, but I could take a shower. It was just cold. I brought this thing in with me and hung it up outside. And I'm like, yep, you know, and it was cool. And that made the day. I got to say that was great. Another big thing, obviously, food, water. Another big thing that made the day before the trip, I bought one of those like foldable solar packs that you can do that you see people carry on the backpack. Way that worked. And, you know, they're on Amazon, they're everywhere, but it has like the little USB ports and that kind of thing inside it. And you just plug directly into it. It was cloudy and overcast. And I'm like, I'm not going to get anything with solar. And my phone went from 0 to 17% in less than an hour, you know, in the clouds and everything out there. So that was kind of huge because I was able to keep things going. I also, because I was doing a talk on EMPs, I actually had brought a bunch of those little solar battery blocks kind of thing that you have to charge up your phone. You see them for like 20 or $29 now. I don't know. Everything gets more expensive. I bought them for all like 15 to 20 when I bought them, but who knows what they are now. I had those that I could plug a phone in and charge, but it was nice to check out the solar and not drain those down. You know, I was able to leave those until I needed them as a last resort. Right. So I knew I always had a backup, but I got to say, we went 150 miles before we could really connect to maps or have real phone service or send a text or do anything. And
Hmm.
that's insane. I mean, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying it's not
Right.
how we expect the world to be, right?
Right.
And all right, I think I have to go handle things. Kevin, you're going to take care of it. I got to go see.
All right.
All right. Tell us about whatever. Keep talking.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about hurricanes real quick. I know that we're probably going to cut this out for the podcast itself, but in the meantime, we can chit chat a little bit. One of the main things that I see with hurricanes is people going in the water. Like the area is flooded and just like, oh, I can walk through that. I can drive my car through that. We had Hurricane Irene hit up where I live about 10 years ago, and I remember being parked where the road was flooded out, and I saw a guy on the other side in his pickup truck, and I was like, he's not going to drive through that, is he? You could see where the guardrail went underneath the water, so it was at least 3 feet deep, and the guy got in there about 3 or 4 feet deep, and his truck started floating. I don't know how deep it ended up being, but he had to climb out and sit on the roof of his pickup truck. Him and his girlfriend, which I'm sure she was talking shit the whole the whole time. But I mean, it was deserved. Like, what are you doing? Don't drive through that shit. After hurricanes, even after the hurricanes passed, be really careful about going on the about going into the water. Things have changed. You might think what's underneath that water, but things have changed. So a lot of that stuff is common sense, but a lot of people get hurt doing it. You could walk in water that's got a live power line in it. You don't know what's in there, and a lot of people get hurt doing that sort of bullshit. The other thing is to be aware of is documenting or saving your phone calls for emergencies. I remember after September 11th, I was in New Jersey. I had family in New York, and I tried to call them, and it was just everything was busy, dead. And it's one of those things that you shouldn't be calling, shouldn't be tying up lines with with bullshit that's not necessary, especially when there's real emergencies happening. People are in actual danger. One of the big things you see in a lot of these hurricanes is the people getting thinking that they're not going to get flooded, stay at home, and then the flood water raises up to the first floor, so they go up to the second floor, and the water keeps rising, so they get up in the attic, and then they don't have anywhere else to go when the water keeps coming up. You keep thinking the water is going to start going down anytime now, but you don't know. There's a lot of rivers that will not even swell until a day or two after the rain is done, because you know because they're all the tributaries are still running into those rivers. A lot of spots don't actually flood until 6 or 12 hours after the rain started. So that's another thing to pay attention to. Another big thing to think about is a lot of people think it's never flooded where I live. I live high up in the mountain, or I live up on a hill, and it's never going to flood here. That's true. That's true until you get one of these, century, once in a lifetime storms that actually hits your area, and you don't know what's going to happen specifically when it's hitting you directly. Um, you know, the other thing to pay attention to is your drinking water. Generally speaking, if you're on like a municipal water or something like that, the water will be fine. It'll be okay. But if that water starts coming out brown, take note of that. Stick to your bottled water if something seems off with your drinking water. But yeah, a lot of those diseases, a lot of things spread with those kinds of diseases. Flooding. It'll flood out the the septic tanks. It'll flood out the sewer plants. I know during Irene, I was working at a wastewater plant, and the river came right up over the water plant. So everybody that was flushing their toilet was just going directly out into the river. And I know downstream, a lot of people took that river water in for for drinking water plants. And you have to be conscientious. I mean, honestly, you should know where your water's coming from. You should know where your water plant is, and you should know where your wastewater plant is if you live in a city. A lot of people are on wells, and a lot of people have leach fields and things like that. And that's a big plus, as long as you don't get directly flooded and your well doesn't, your well isn't under your wellhead isn't under a couple of feet of water, because that water is getting in there, and it's just mud that's coming in from outside where animals been shitting. I don't know where you piss, but all that stuff is going right into your well if it's underwater. Wells are great because the ground filters out most of the stuff that's coming into it from the sides, and that's great. But when it's underwater, it can get in without getting any of that filtering and without any of that benefit of having that well. Let's see here. Yeah, exactly. Slow burn. That's 100% right. I mean, a lot of diseases are spread during these storms, especially when people don't have great facilities to begin with. I know when Haiti had its hurricane, there was a big outbreak of I think it was cholera, some form of dysentery, and it just spread like wildfire. One person got it, was pooping in the wrong spot, and it got into the water supply. People were drinking unclean water and getting sick, and it was like a huge outbreak that really at a time that they're already in crisis. But those things are you got to be careful with those things. They get out of hand fast. One of the things I would say for preparing for a hurricane is make sure you have clean drinking water. Make sure you have bottled water. Make sure you have jugs of water, access to water, even water that isn't clean, that you can use to like flush your toilet, or just wash your hands off with some soap. It makes a big difference having access to clean water that's not going to get you sick. Dehydration is a big issue, and like Chris was saying, there's water everywhere. It's all around you, no problem. But that water is not safe to drink, and it's not safe to it's not safe for consumption. And you really don't want to be drinking mud water when it comes down to it. You're going to end up getting dehydrated just from the diarrhea you have. One of the other big things that I think a lot of people missed out on in this situation was the battery powered radios. Cell phones weren't working. Cell towers were down. Power lines were down. Internet, cable, Wi-Fi, all that stuff was down, and nobody had a good way to get good information. And one of the few ways that will always work is radios. Radio in your car, radio inside. If you're lucky, you could go outside and start your car and just sit in your car and listen to the radio. But those hand crank radios, they're usually bullshit. They're usually suck ass. It's better to just have a battery powered radio where you can get, the alerts, flash flood warnings, the alerts from local governments and things like that can keep you on track for that sort of stuff. Another thing I see a lot of people doing is not evacuating when they're told to evacuate. That happened in Hurricane Katrina down in Louisiana. A lot of people just either weren't able to, or thought, we'll be fine. It'll be fine. We've had hurricanes here before. and they ended up drowning. They ended up, not making it. I think a lot of people overestimate their preparedness when it comes to these sorts of emergencies. This isn't a rainstorm. This is a hurricane, and it's a big deal. The wind, especially in these areas like Asheville, where there's so many trees. I mean, it's right in the middle of a forest. These roads that are these windy mountain roads that got washed out, the power line was down everywhere because there are so many trees. It's basically a city inside a giant forest all around it. That stuff, people don't realize how long the power can be out when it gets to be one of these big storms. A lot of us think of, 12 hours is a long time to go without power. And for most storms, that's the case. But in this situation, we're here 3 or 4 days later, and there's still a lot of people without power. Yes. So after the storm, what do you do? Well, I mean, then it's time to start cleanup, right? You still don't have internet. You still don't have water. But you have to be really careful, because if you get hurt while you're cleaning up, while you're doing stuff, there's not going to be anybody to get there to help you out. You might be stuck with a broken leg or arm, sitting in the mud for 3 or 4 hours before anyone even notices you're there. A lot of these situations, it's best to take things slow and easy until people with the trucks, the power companies, the earth movers can get in there and start getting things straightened out. When the ambulances and the emergency rooms and everything are overrun with victims, you don't want to be one of those people that's sitting in line in the emergency room for 8 hours because because every bed is taken, every doctor isn't available. You don't want to be one of those people. You want to be at home, chilling out, listening to your podcasts, and hanging out with me. You don't want to be sitting in a waiting room with those gross, sick people, end up infected yourself with something nasty. Another thing I see a lot of people do when power outages come along is stupid. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know. Don't run your generator in your house. If it's a gas or diesel generator, don't run it in your house. Those exhaust fumes will kill you. You'll die of carbon monoxide, and that's it. Just get a headache, fall asleep, and that's the end of your life. You don't want to be in that situation over something stupid like that. Another stupid thing I saw people doing was moving grills into their house to warm them up, and then obviously, catching on fire and burning the fucking house down because they don't know what they're doing. Don't be the asshole. Don't be the dummy that does that. Don't be the dummy that lights their house on fire or poisons themselves by running stuff indoors that isn't meant for indoors. Obviously, don't walk, swim, or drive through floodwaters. That's a big deal that we already touched on. Be careful about electrical wires. They might be dead. They might not be dead, though. They might, if the line's down, it might still be live on one end of those wires. And you don't want to be guessing on whether or not you can touch it before you touch it. And then the last thing really is documenting your property damage. Call your insurance company and see what services they provide, but also, keep track of what you have and what was destroyed, what was damaged. Turn all that shit into the insurance company. They're going to try and fuck you out of as much money as possible. Don't let them do it, man. Don't let them do it. They'll rip you off if they can. Those companies never have any problem taking your payments, but as soon as it comes to paying out, it's a different story. So, what are we getting out of this? What we learn out of this hurricane? That's like the biggest thing we can do when we deal with one of these natural disasters is, what did we take out of this event? How can we get better prepared for the next once in a lifetime event that seemed to happen 5 or 6 times in our lifetimes. Well, I mean, a lot of people were out of power. And so I think that that's something that obviously everybody should be preparing for, whether you're in the line of a hurricane, if you're on the panhandle in Florida or something, or whether you're not generally in the line of hurricanes like Asheville. Asheville, North Carolina is a mountain town. I've been there quite a few times. My grandma used to live there. I used to go visit her. But what can you take out of these events when these happen? They're all you can do is learn from your mistakes and make decisions that are gonna prevent those same mistakes from happening to you again.
I like it.
Chuck,
I'm
what
back.
do you got?
So I can't help but notice I get up and step out for a minute, and all of a sudden there's all these comments. People are having a good time. When I come back, I see I missed the whole party. I'm like, yeah, I see what happens.
Party's over.
So, all right. So I don't want to step on your toes. So what did we talk about? Anything good?
Well, we just talked about basically what you should do before a hurricane, during a hurricane, and after a hurricane. I was just talking about how the insurance company is going to try and fuck everybody over on this because they have no problem taking your payments, but not paying you out when it's time.
They didn't pay for the Twin Towers collapsing, but they were fully insured.
They were fully insured. They could not cover it though.
But yeah, no, it's crazy. It's crazy like that. But yeah. The one of the big things, like we always had the plan for like water filtration and stuff, but you see that flooding and stuff going on in Asheville, and you're not filtering that water. I mean,
no.
You can, but I mean, it's a huge ordeal of separating that mud and toxic and disaster everywhere. You don't want to be dealing with that. So one of the big things I would say is, one, really pay attention to the weather and the things coming. When you hear a storm's coming, like, take it seriously, really watch it. One of the big things, like, people were putting their stuff high up, putting it where it's going to be safe and not get damaged. Now, if you have cases of water on the floor in the garage and you're like, oh, the water might get to 2 feet in my garage. Well, okay, there are cases of water. You can probably figure it out, like you could move it as it goes, whatever, that kind of thing. But there are a lot of things that can't get wet, and just understand that, and maybe getting some containers to store your stuff properly, your food, your that kind of stuff, having that set up beforehand. Start to think of how you do your storage. And hey, if some kind of crazy flooding, now obviously there's places that flooding isn't going to happen. I know I picked my house out based on, hey, if there was a big flood, I mean, again, you weigh all the pros and cons, but I noted, the water table and in the area, like Kevin is up on a big hill. The odds of Kevin's house flooding, now he might flood from rain with 2 inches of surface water, 3 inches, 4 inches, but he's not going to get flash flooding of huge amounts because he's near a creek, but just the same, he's like 50 feet above the creek. So that creek's really going to rise. Same thing with me, the nearest creek is like 50 feet down in the whole sea level thing, compared to where I'm at. Probably not going to get big flash flooding, but you have to be aware of what's around you and what's coming. And obviously, if you're right underneath the Hoover Dam, that might be different. 50 feet might not be enough. I don't know. But you just have to take all that into account. But just the same, could the flooding isolate you where you couldn't get out? How long do you have storage for stuff like that?
Yeah.
But
and that does happen to me during huge rain events, that it'll flood out one of the roads that is one of the only road road out of my area.
That definitely can happen, right? Where you're just stuck. And so, it's something to think about, to have a plan. Either one, I can deal with staying here. A lot of you guys have been prepping for winter storms and that kind of stuff. You can, you plan to, hey, I might get stuck and have to hunker down. the road might close out for 3 months, that it could ice up. Obviously, you live in a pretty isolated, remote area if that's the case. But
Mhm.
just the same, you take action for that. You need to be aware of that. And nobody saw flooding coming the way that it did, like as much as they got. I mean, in my mind, I'm
Specifically
like,
in Asheville,
right,
where it's in the mountains. You know what I
you're in the
mean?
mountains. How could it
Yeah.
flood? I'm on top of a mountain.
Hmm.
Even the Great Flood, they probably were pretty good for a while,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It's just, yeah, but turns out, the unexpected can happen. And that's one of the big things about prepping is, being prepared for the unexpected. All right. But one of the other lessons learned, maps. So I was talking to the people at Prepper Camp when I gave my lecture. I was like, oh, in my get home bag, I always have a map. And the map I have in there is a Ram McNally road atlas for the United States. But it turns out it didn't have all those little roads right there.
Right.
Now, and somebody came up and was like really drilling down with questions, what do you do? And I said, look, to be honest, I said, I live in North Carolina. So I have a map of North Carolina that is more detailed and more specific because the majority of my travel is there. Right.
Right.
But if I'm driving from North Carolina to New York, do I have an individual map for each one of those places? I don't. Right. It just, you do what you can do. Right.
Hmm.
I have a detailed map in New York. I have a detailed map in North Carolina, but I lived in both those places. Do I have a
Hmm.
detailed map in New Jersey and all these other places? No. In my mind, I'm like, well, I just have to get to a highway, and you can always find a highway, and then I'll find that on the map and I'm good to go. Well, when you're in a desperate situation, we couldn't get out. Like, we drove and they're like, oh, you're entering South Carolina. And I'm like, oh, we're right on the edge here. And they're like, oh, but you got to turn around and go back. And then, all right, now there's all these other random roads. Which one? And then my wife is like, there's a car, follow them. They probably know where they're going. But you
Hmm.
don't know. You don't
Right.
know if they know
They
where
might
they're
live down that street and they're just
going.
going home.
And they're just going home, it's whatever. But that's the kind of thing. So the more you can prepare for that kind of thing, or draw out, hey, I'm going into this area that's really remote off the highway. Let me draw out a map. But the thing is, even if I drove the map of where I was going in, I still, all right, that road's now closed. What's your plan B? Well, I don't know. It's just, that was the problem. It's like every turn we took, there's new trees in the road and new, mud and whatever stopping you from going. And it was, well, when you're running out of gas, you start to panic like, oh, I can't go here. What do I do?
Right.
All right, I got to go there. All right, I'm just burning gas for no reason. And it's the unknown of, there's nothing on my phone that says, hey, in 10 miles, well, it said in 10 miles, there's a gas station, but you don't know if they're going to have power or whatever. And
Right.
that was the thing. Do we take the chance and drive off the exit and go look for it? And it may or may not be there. And the thing is, the further from the exit, the more likely they are to have gas if they have power.
Right.
So you're trying to juggle it all. And it was just crazy. So it's that kind of unexpected. And I feel like a lot of people in prepping, and I'm guilty of this to some extent myself, is something bad happens and then we react.
Right.
Like, oh, this, I'm never going into the middle of a hurricane without gas cans in the back of my car. Well, yeah, that's
Hmm.
good now. That's not really
Not
helpful
good.
before. Right
Yeah.
now, I had lots of coffee because I had already learned that lesson.
Uh-huh.
That's one of the things Kevin always talks about is go camping, go do stuff where you get to test yourself. You get to test what's going on. And that's where you learn these lessons. That's how it really um gets proven and gets ingrained in your head, and you start to step up your game. The other thing is, I would say that's where that ham radio and being able to call out for help, having, even if it's the cheap Bofang with a better antenna or something like that, some level of communication, or at least have a neighbor, who's going to have that level of communication to be able to get out. For some of these people in towns, I've been talking to a lot of people about what's going on in North Carolina here, and they're finding bodies and bad things. It's not pretty out there. And these people really got wiped out. And it's
Yeah.
like the water got so high and they're finding bodies in trees. And, it's just like crazy. And
Yeah,
just
they said the
constant,
death toll's over 200 now. I
uh,
mean, it's still rising, but you know,
they just still can't get in. And there's no way the power comes back quickly. If you saw the devastation, it's just unbelievable when you see every single line ripped down. It's like, oh, go put all the power in for
for the
half of the
entire
state,
county.
or
Yeah.
a state's worth of, stuff. So that it's kind of unbelievable. Another thing I wanted to touch on. Did you see all the cars that were catching on fire? People who had electric cars in Florida. The
Uh,
garages were flooding up. It got under the car. The cars caught on fire and were burning down the house. There was like 4 or 5 instances of that.
shit. I didn't
Um,
even think of that. I didn't think that they would light on fire like that though. You know what I
yeah, they were
mean?
saying because of the batteries. It's the whole
Yeah.
like lithium ion thing that they were, and so that was a thing. They were actually burning down their houses with the flood because their cars. The fire department's fighting that. I saw a big story on that. It's funny, a lot of the stories you'll see a lot at first, and then somehow they all disappear. Like Google's like, oh, we don't like
Yeah.
that
Nope.
idea. And
Nope.
it was funny. I saw it like as far as the conspiracy stuff. I saw a bunch of stuff where people were talking about how they were finding these little blue gel packets or whatever that they were seeding the storm, and that's why we got the big. So, but then when I went to pull up pictures so I could show you guys, nothing.
They're all gone.
You're not finding anything on the internet.
No, DARPA took care of that, buddy.
DARPA got you straight. So if you do find those and want to put them in the comments, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd
The
love
other,
to see the so they're like actual seeds is what they're saying.
yeah, basically. So they kind of look like the blue, like Tide Pods, except small.
Okay.
Like little. And
Uh,
they were saying that it somehow had been tied. They were finding it in other countries as well with the storms. Now,
all
some
right.
people were making an argument that it was part of the pollution that it's causing it to like gel, and in
Uh,
the atmosphere we have so many microplastics that they're just
they're just
you
clumping
know,
together in
yeah,
the clouds,
clumping
huh?
together. So that was another way you could go with that.
All
I'm
right.
not sure about any of that. I'm just saying that the internet changes the reality every day. It's just constantly. So be aware of that. Another thing, I did find an article about King Mountain has that was one of the towns that kind of got wiped out in North Carolina. They had a proposed lithium mine, and they were like, oh, they had to go flood the whole area because now the town's on board with turning it into a giant lithium mine.
Yeah.
Saying
Who's after the lithium? I mean, it's
it's
cell
the car
phone companies.
batteries for your Tesla and your cell
Right.
phones and your
Right. So is it Elon Musk that's trying to run people
uh-huh.
out?
And
Who's
did he
behind?
not put all that stuff in space? Could he not have maybe?
Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm going?
Yep. He shot all
Thank
those
you guys.
satellites up there, and they all had like 5 gallons of water. And then when
Yep.
the time was right, they all shot down. Took it out. Took
See,
out
I
King
think you're
Mountain.
picking up what I'm putting down. I don't know. That was just the crazy end of it. But so like I said, having a stockpile of food and water and actually being able to protect it and store it in a safe place that's going to be there. Now we can't see the future. I mean, we saw a video of houses washing down the road, right? Or I did. I don't know. There were some like rolling through town. The
Yeah.
guy's filming and a house goes by and you're like, really? Like, that guy, I don't know what he could have done to prepare, right? I mean, I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe seat belts in the upstairs.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the same thing, like tornadoes come in and wipe out people, right? So there's always times, but I would say storing your stuff in multiple locations is definitely a key. a tornado might wipe out your house, but if you had buried a 55-gallon drum of supplies, then that would be one set of supplies that would be safe. Now, if you had buried your 55-gallon drum of supplies and it wasn't watertight, and even if you were flooded with 3 feet of water, you're probably not getting it.
Right.
But if that was one of your locations and the other one was in the attic, then you'd have multiple scenarios, right? The one would have been taken out in a tornado, one would have been taken out in a flood, but you'd still have 50% of your stores in any given crisis. So think about that. Think about, ways to do it. But another thing, one of the people we were we were at prepper camp with, they had a hotel, and it was crazy because they showed up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, set up their stuff, and the hotel was 15 miles away, went to go back to the hotel, and the road was gone and they couldn't get back to the hotel. And
Mhm.
so they're like, well, we don't even have something to sleep in
Right.
or bottled water or anything like that because you didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
And so that kind of thing, always have some backup in your car, and I'm like, yeah, I have my get home bag, but I really just have those like thermal sleeping bags. I didn't have nice blankets like that can
Right.
make your lives a lot more comfortable. Um,
Mhm.
I had water to share, but it was like, I don't know how to help you, and I feel bad, it's like, but that's the kind of thing. And, people realize how crazy it can get in the unexpected. So
Mhm.
that's it. Any more things you'd want to stock for a hurricane that I missed? Or
No, I mean, just like to reiterate, bottled water, because big storms like that can destroy your
yeah,
clean drinking water wherever you get it from, whether it's a well in the house or a water plant. Um, and always carry an extra pair of socks, man.
communications and maps are always nice too. I just got
Hmm.
to say, those people are really stuck where they can't get information in or information out. And that's a big thing. And so knowing extra routes out is huge. And and there's the normal stuff, but it's just, yeah, I need food and water. I need, to be able to maintain. I need to be able to stay dry. But aside of that, maybe have some extra tarps, things like that in the garage that you'd be able to go to. And hey, I can patch that hole in the roof. You don't know how many houses I saw with trees through the roof. It was unbelievable. Dude, I saw probably like 15 houses with trees through the roof. I'm not saying
Hmm.
on the roof, like whatever, because that
Right.
number goes way up. I'm saying through the roof. And it's, oh, there's a tree in my living room and I can't get out because I'm old and, not as capable anymore. And that happens. So I'm just saying, think of these things beforehand and, you know, do be safe. That's what I can say. And with that, I'd say you guys are awesome. I appreciate you sticking around. Sharon
And
and Sharon
Sharon,
put in the
nice to see you.
comments, Kevin. Yep.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you guys are great. And we appreciate you sticking around with us. So, with that, stay safe and we'll talk to you guys next week.